My name is Rachel Monroe. I learned early that love, in my family, was a currency, and I was perpetually overdrawn. I spent nearly a decade in the army, collecting scars on both my skin and my soul, thinking that sacrifice might finally balance the books. I learned to sleep in the sand, to trust the man next to me with my life, and to pack away my feelings into a neat, tight footlocker in the back of my mind. But nothing in my training prepared me for the text message I received 5 days before Christmas. I was sitting in my small, sparse apartment in Fayetteville, the air smelling of pine from a cheap candle and the faint, ever-present scent of old dust. I'd finally come home, not just from my last deployment, but for good. My discharge papers were framed on the wall, the only picture I'd bothered to hang. I was scrolling through flight details, imagining my mother's apple pie and the awkward but familiar rhythm of a holiday at home, when my phone buzzed. It was from my father. "Don't bother coming this Christmas. We decided it's best you stay away this year." That was it. No preamble, no explanation. Just a digital guillotine, severing the last frayed thread of hope I'd been clinging to. I stared at the words until they blurred. I thought of the Christmases I'd missed, the birthdays I'd called in from a satellite phone with a 2-second delay, the portion of every paycheck I'd sent home without being asked. All of it erased in a single, callous message. My mother didn't call to soften the blow. My brother, Tyler, who I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with his college applications, remained silent. It was a consensus. A quiet, family vote had been taken, and I had been exiled. A cold, calm wave washed over me, extinguishing the familiar flicker of hurt. It was the same feeling I'd had on a dusty road outside of Kandahar, right after an IED went off too close, a sudden, sharp clarity where all the noise of the world falls away and you're left with only the essential truth. And the truth was, I had been trying to gain entry to a house where the locks were never meant for my key. I typed back one word, fine. It wasn't the broken fine of a wounded daughter. It was the fine of a soldier who has just been given her final orders. Mission understood. I canceled my flight, deleted the confirmation email, and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving. I raised my glass to the empty room, to the twinkling lights I'd strung over my window, and I toasted the ghost of the family I had tried so hard to love. 5 days later, on Christmas morning, I woke up to a phone vibrating with a frantic energy. 10 missed calls. My mother, my brother, my father, and one from a name I recognized with a jolt, Harold Wells, my parents' lawyer. The panic in their digital voices was a day late and a dollar short. Because in the 5 days of silence, I hadn't been grieving. I had been planning. They had forgotten one crucial detail from a desperate summer 5 years ago. They thought they had cut me off, but they had forgotten that, legally, I was the one holding the scissors. Let me take you back. My father was a man who built his identity on the foundation of a house he couldn't quite afford. He was a contractor, proud and stubborn, with a portfolio of failed business ventures and a credit score to match. Home was 12, Windmere Lane, a sprawling 2-story colonial in a neighborhood that was always just a little too expensive for us. It was his castle, his proof to the world that he was a success. My mother was his loyal lady-in-waiting, her life's purpose to manage his moods and maintain the pristine image of their life. Tyler learned early on that the path of least resistance was to mirror my father's opinions, to laugh at his jokes, to become a smaller, softer echo of the man. I never fit. I was too questioning, too quiet, too observant. When I enlisted at 18, it wasn't out of patriotism, it was an escape. I needed to find a place where my worth was measured in merit, not in my ability to stay small and silent. My father's farewell was a gruff, try not to embarrass the family name. He never once said he was proud, not when I made sergeant, not when I was awarded a commendation medal. My service was a strange, abstract concept to them, something that happened far away and was best not discussed at the dinner table because, as my mother once whispered to me over the phone, it makes your father anxious. I played the part of the good daughter from a distance. I sent money for a new roof, for a car repair, for property taxes. They never said thank you. The checks were just cashed, the money absorbed into the grand performance of their perfect life. But 5 years ago, during a brief leave between deployments, my father sat me down at the kitchen table. He was trying to refinance the house, he explained, but the bank was being difficult. His credit was a temporary issue. He just needed a co-signer, someone with a stable income and a clean record. It was just a formality, he'd said, his eyes avoiding mine. It would really help us out, Rachel. It would show the bank we're a solid family unit. A solid family unit. I was 24, exhausted from the desert heat, and starving for a single crumb of his approval. I saw the papers, the dense paragraphs of legalese, but all I really saw was a chance. A chance to finally be a part of the foundation, not just a distant, supporting beam. So I signed. I signed my name, Rachel Monroe, on the line he pointed to, and I flew back to my real life, the one with sand and rules and a clear chain of command. I had completely forgotten about it. The memory was buried under years of patrols, firefights, and the faces of friends I'd lost. But after his text, after the finality of that exclusion, something nudged me. I spent a full day digging through a hard drive of old scanned documents I kept from my service. And there it was. The refinance agreement. I read it this time, not as a desperate daughter, but as a strategist. And I saw the clause my father had either ignored or never understood. In dense, legal language, it laid out the terms for a co-signer in a high-risk loan. Because of my father's poor financial history, the bank had insisted on an unusual provision. It stated that the co-signer, me, would hold a 51% controlling interest in the property title until the loan reached maturity. It wasn't just a signature, it was a transfer of power. He hadn't just asked me to co-sign. He had, in effect, signed over the majority of his castle to the daughter he had just banished from the kingdom. A slow, quiet smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of vengeance. It was a smile of profound, crystalline clarity. He thought I was a tool to be used and discarded. But the tool he had used was a key. The key to the front door he had just slammed in my face. I didn't call him. I didn't text. I did something far more deliberate. I drafted a letter. It was formal, polite, and completely devoid of emotion. To whom it may concern. Please be advised that, effective immediately, I, Rachel Monroe, will be exercising my legal rights as the majority stakeholder and co-owner of the property located at 12 Windmere Lane, as stipulated in the mortgage agreement dated June 14, 2018. All decisions regarding the property, including occupancy and financial management, will henceforth be under my direct authority. My legal counsel will be in contact shortly to discuss the terms of the transition. I mailed it via certified post, requiring a signature upon receipt. I imagined them opening it, my father's face turning from confusion to rage, my mother's hands starting to tremble. Then I turned off my phone, packed a small bag, and drove to a quiet, secluded cabin in the Smoky Mountains I'd rented for myself. I spent Christmas Eve watching the snow fall, a fire crackling in the hearth, surrounded by a silence that felt more like home than my actual house ever had. On Christmas morning, I turned my phone back on. The barrage of missed calls was the only carol I needed to hear. They were finally ready to talk. But the conversation was going to be on my terms now. The first call I answered was from Tyler. His voice was a frantic jumble of accusation and disbelief. Ratch, what the hell is going on? Mom is hysterical, and Dad is threatening to sue you. You sent them a legal letter on Christmas Eve. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the warmth a comforting contrast to the cold fury in his words. I looked out the cabin window at the snow-dusted pines. I sent a notification of a change in legal status, Tyler. It's business. Business? This is our family. Our home, he yelled. Is it? I asked, my voice dangerously calm, because just last week, I was explicitly told I was not welcome in that home. I was told to stay away. I'm just honoring that request and, in the process, securing my asset. Your asset? Dad put the down payment on that house. And I secured the loan that saved it from foreclosure, I countered. He needed my name, my credit, my stability. He just never expected me to read the fine print. He sputtered, at a loss for words. So you're just going to, what? Kick us out? I haven't decided yet, I said, letting the words hang in the silence. But for the first time, the decision is mine. Tell Dad his lawyer can speak to my lawyer. I'm not discussing it with anyone else. I hung up before he could respond. The next call was from Harold Wells, a man whose voice oozed a placating, condescending sympathy. Miss Monroe, Rachel, he began, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. This letter has caused your family a great deal of distress over the holidays. There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Wells, I said, cutting him off. My voice was crisp, the voice I used to give orders on the field. The contract is legally binding. I have a copy, and I'm sure you do too. My controlling interest in the property is now active. He cleared his throat. Well, perhaps we can discuss the buyout. I'm sure your father would be willing to make a generous offer to have you sign over your interest. And there it was. The real fear. It wasn't about family. It was about finance. My father had likely defaulted on a payment or was trying to leverage the house for another failed venture, and he had run headfirst into the roadblock of my signature. I'm not interested in a buyout right now, I said. But I am open to a conversation. With my father. He can call me himself. No lawyers, no intermediaries. Just him. Harold was silent for a moment. He understood immediately. This wasn't about the house. It was about accountability. He knew my father well enough to know that such a call would be the ultimate concession, an admission of my power over him. I'll pass that along, he said stiffly. I spent the rest of the day in peaceful solitude. I read a book, went for a walk in the snow, and cooked a small meal for myself. There were no presents under a tree, no festive music, but I felt a profound sense of rightness, of balance restored. I hadn't started this war, but I was in command now, and I was going to see it through to the end. The call from my mother came late that night. Her voice was a thin, desperate whisper. Rachel, please. You're tearing this family apart. Your father, he's not a young man. The stress. Mom, I said, my voice softer now, but no less firm. Where were you when he sent me that text? A shaky breath on the other end of the line. He was just upset. You know how he gets. I know exactly how he gets, I replied. I've spent my entire life tiptoeing around how he gets. But let me ask you something else. Do you remember my 21st birthday? I was at Fort Bragg, in the middle of basic training. I called home, and you told me Dad was disappointed I'd chosen a man's life, and that I shouldn't expect a celebration when I got back. She was crying now, soft, helpless sobs. I never said that. You did, I said, the memory as sharp as shrapnel. And you've been saying it, in 1,000 different ways, ever since. By staying silent, by making excuses, by asking me to be smaller so he could feel bigger. You chose his comfort over your daughter's heart, every single time. What do you want from us, Rachel? She wept. I don't want anything from you anymore, I said, and the truth of it settled in my bones. That's the whole point. This isn't a negotiation. It's a notification. I ended the call gently. I felt no satisfaction in her pain, only a deep, abiding sorrow for the mother I had needed and never had. But my own survival now depended on my ability to hold this line. The next day, I contacted a property management company run by a retired master sergeant I'd served with. I hired him to conduct a formal inspection of the property. It was time to see what my investment truly looked like. The report I received 2 days later lit a fire in me that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with resolve. Ratch, my friend's voice said over the phone, the house is lived in. Hard. There's some water damage in the basement. Looks like a slow leak. But that's not the main thing. Your brother's old room and the guest room? They've been rented out. Looks like they've had tenants for at least a year. Cash under the table, from what I can gather. I froze. They had turned my childhood home, the property I had legally saved, into an illegal, off-the-books boarding house. They had filled the rooms I grew up in with strangers, all while telling me, their own daughter, their legal co-owner, that there was no room for me. The betrayal was so profound, so audacious, it almost defied belief. It was the final piece of the puzzle. I wasn't just an inconvenience to them, I was an income stream they could tap while simultaneously erasing my existence. That night, I drafted a second document. This was no longer a polite letter. It was a formal notice of intent. Effective immediately, the property at 12 Windermere Lane is under new management. All current occupants, including informal tenants, are to vacate the premises within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in formal eviction proceedings. All communications are to be directed through my legal counsel. Any attempt to damage the property or intimidate my representatives will be met with the full force of the law. I signed it with my full name and rank, Sergeant First Class Rachel Monroe, U.S. Army, retired. I sent it to Harold Wells and a copy directly to the house. Then I texted Tyler one last time. You have 30 days. The storm of voicemails that followed was epic. Pleading, threats, accusations. I listened to none of them. I had given my orders. The chain of command was clear. They had lived in their world of unspoken rules and emotional manipulation for decades. But now they were in my world. A world of contracts, consequences, and unshakable resolve. Come January 31st, they would learn what it truly felt like to be told they were not welcome home. January 2nd dawned cold and gray. I drove back from the mountains, the peace of my solitary Christmas a shield around my heart. I didn't go to the house alone. I met my property manager, Mike, and a licensed locksmith in a coffee shop a mile away. I wore what felt like my uniform, dark jeans, combat boots, and a plain black coat. My posture was straight, my expression neutral. This was not a family visit. It was a tactical operation. When we pulled up to 12 Windermere Lane, my father was waiting on the porch, his face a mottled red. Rachel, you call off this circus right now, he bellowed as I walked up the driveway. I didn't break my stride. I walked past him and through the front door he had left ajar. My house, my rules. The air inside was thick with tension. My mother stood at the foot of the stairs, clutching a dish towel as if it were a shield. Tyler was slumped on the sofa, refusing to meet my eyes. This is not a circus, I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the heavy silence. This is a legal and orderly transition of management. As the majority owner of this property, I am exercising my right to secure my investment. Your investment? My father sputtered. I built this house with my own 2 hands. And you were about to lose it with your own 2 hands, I replied, my gaze unwavering. You used my name and my good credit to save it. You signed a contract. Did you think I would just forget? He had no answer for that. The truth was a weapon he wasn't used to facing. The informal tenants in the upstairs bedrooms have been given a 10-day notice to vacate, I continued, turning to address the room. As for the 3 of you, you have 2 options. You can sign a formal lease agreement with my property management company and pay fair market rent, or you can find alternative housing. You have until January 31st to decide. All financial transactions and communications will go through Mike from now on. I nodded toward my property manager, who stood impassively by the door. My mother finally found her voice, a choked, pleading whisper. Rachel, this is our home. Where would we go? I looked at her, at the woman who had stood by and watched my heart break 1,000 times, and I felt a wave of profound, weary sadness. I don't know, Mom, I said, my voice softer than I intended. That's a question you probably should have asked yourselves before you told me not to come home for Christmas. Her face crumpled, and she buried it in the dish towel. Tyler finally looked up, his expression a mixture of shame and helplessness. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. I don't need an apology, Tyler. I needed a brother. It's too late for both. I gave the signal to the locksmith, who began to work on the front door, replacing the old lock with a new, high-security one. The quiet, methodical clicks of the tumblers were the only sound in the room. As I turned to leave, my father blocked my path. "You've become hard, Rachel," he said, his voice low and bitter. "The army did that to you." I met his gaze, and for the first time, I felt no fear, no need for his approval. Only a vast, empty pity. "No, Dad," I said. "You did this. I just learned to survive it." I walked out of the house and didn't look back. The cold air felt clean on my face. I had not won a battle. I had simply ended a war that had been raging inside me for my entire life. The house was no longer a home filled with ghosts of what I thought a family should be. It was just a property, an asset, and it was mine. The 30 days passed in a deafening silence. There were no more pleading calls, no angry texts. They must have finally understood that the chain of command had changed permanently. On the morning of February 1st, I returned to the house. The key Mike had given me slid into the new lock with a satisfying click. The house was empty. Eerily so. They had taken their furniture, their pictures, their lives, and they had vanished. There was no note on the counter, no forwarding address. Just a profound, hollow silence that echoed with years of unspoken words. I walked through the rooms, my boots echoing on the bare hardwood floors. In my old bedroom, someone had left behind a single, dusty paperback on the windowsill. In the living room, I saw a deep gouge in the floor where the old sofa used to be, the sofa I'd helped pay for with my signing bonus. It was a physical scar marking a place of emotional wounding. I stood in the center of the empty living room, the winter light streaming in through the large bay window. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel sad. I felt still. The house was a clean slate, a blank canvas, and so was I. The ghosts had been evicted. I didn't sell the house. That would have been too easy, too transactional. Instead, I began a new mission. I reached out to veteran support networks, secured grants, and used my own savings. Over the next 6 months, I transformed 12 Windmere Lane. We painted the walls in warm, calming colors. We furnished the rooms with comfortable, sturdy furniture. We turned the leaky basement into a gym and resource center. We planted a garden in the backyard. We named it the Monroe House, not after my family, but after the woman I had become. It opened in the fall, a transitional home for female veterans struggling to find their footing after service. It became a sanctuary for women like me, women who had served their country only to find they had no home to return to, women who needed a safe harbor to heal and rebuild. I never heard from my father again. My mother sent a single and signed Christmas card the following year, which I threw away unopened. Tyler texted me once, a simple, "I'm sorry." I didn't reply. Forgiveness was a currency I no longer dealt in. My focus was on the future, on the women who now filled the rooms of the Monroe House with laughter, with tears, with the quiet, determined work of reclaiming their lives. Sometimes, in the evening, I sit on the front porch, the same porch I was never truly welcomed on, and I watch the sunset. I listen to the sounds of my new family, a family forged not by blood, but by shared experience and mutual respect. They call it revenge. They call it cold. But for me, it was never about punishing them. It was about saving myself. I didn't just take back a house. I took back my story. And I turned it into a shelter for others, ensuring that no soldier who came home would ever have to stand alone on the outside, looking in.